The moment I realized something profound was changing was not when the scale moved or the mirror responded, but when the quiet ache inside my body disappeared. The background inflammation I had accepted as normal simply went silent. And that silence made me curious enough to listen deeper to what the body was trying to say. When MSM entered my daily routine, it did not announce itself with drama or instant transformation, but with something far more meaningful, a gradual quieting of internal resistance that I had unknowingly been carrying for years. There was a subtle shift in how my body moved through the day, as if friction had been reduced at the deepest level, not just in the joints, but in the way tissues interacted with one another. Movements that once felt guarded became fluid, and the body stopped bracing itself against its own weight and motion. This experience led me to reflect on how often we interpret discomfort as an inevitable consequence of age, effort, or stress, when in reality it is often the body signaling that something essential has been missing. Over time, the persistent background inflammation that many people live with, the kind that never becomes acute enough to demand medical attention, yet constantly drains energy, began to fade into irrelevance. I did not feel stronger in the conventional sense at first. Instead, I felt less burdened, as though my body had been released from a quiet internal argument. Recovery after physical activity felt smoother, not faster, and this distinction mattered. The body no longer rushed to repair damage in a state of urgency, but responded with calm efficiency, suggesting that healing works best when the internal environment is stable rather than reactive. What stood out most was how MSM seemed to influence my relationship with pain. Pain no longer felt like an enemy or a warning siren, but like information that had finally been processed and resolved. The joints felt more cooperative, connective tissues less irritable, and even posture subtly improved as the body stopped compensating for discomfort it no longer needed to anticipate. This shift highlighted how inflammation is not merely a physical phenomenon, but a state that shapes movement patterns, confidence, and even mood, slowly teaching the body to either trust or protect itself as days turned into weeks. I became more aware of how the body thrives when internal stress is reduced rather than masked. MSM did not create artificial comfort. It appeared to support the body's natural tendency toward balance, allowing it to regulate itself with less interference. This realization reframed my understanding of wellness, not as the pursuit of constant stimulation or aggressive intervention, but as the removal of obstacles that prevent the body from doing what it already knows how to do. In this quieter state, strength emerged not through force, but through ease. Muscles engaged more naturally, joints moved with less hesitation, and the body felt unified rather than segmented. Inflammation, once a constant background noise, became an absence that revealed how much energy had been previously diverted toward internal defense. This absence was not emptiness, but clarity. A reminder that when the body stops fighting itself, it redirects its resources toward movement, resilience, and presence in a way that feels profoundly human. When glycine became part of my daily intake, its influence was not loud or immediately measurable, but deeply perceptible in the way my body began to soften its constant state of alertness. There was a subtle shift in my internal rhythm, as if the nervous system, long accustomed to holding tension, finally recognized that it was safe to release its grip. Evenings felt calmer, thoughts slowed without becoming dull, and sleep no longer felt like something I had to chase or force. Instead, rest arrived naturally, carrying the sense that the body was entering a deeper conversation with itself once the noise of the day faded. Over time, this sense of calm translated into a noticeable change in how my muscles behaved, not in their size or strength at first, but in their willingness to relax. Muscles that had been chronically tight seemed less defensive, allowing movement to feel smoother and less restricted. This taught me that tension is not always the result of effort, but often the residue of unprocessed stress stored quietly within the body. Glycine appeared to offer a kind of internal permission slip, reminding the system that constant vigilance is not required for survival. As sleep quality improved, I began to recognize how profoundly rest governs repair. Mornings felt less like recovery from exhaustion and more like a continuation of restoration that had already taken place overnight. The body felt reorganized, as if it had used the quiet hours to restore order at levels too subtle to consciously perceive. This experience challenged the common belief that progress comes only from pushing harder. revealing instead that growth often occurs when the body is given the conditions to rebuild without interruption. What struck me most was how this sense of internal calm reshaped my relationship with effort. Physical activity felt more efficient, not because I was exerting more force, but because less energy was being wasted on unnecessary tension. Movements became more intentional, breathing more synchronized, and fatigue less oppressive. The body seemed to remember how to conserve energy, allocating it where it was needed, rather than scattering it in response to stress. This shift extended beyond the physical into something more reflective. With the nervous system less reactive, there was greater awareness of how often discomfort is amplified by mental resistance rather than physical limitation. Glycine did not remove challenges, but it softened the internal response to them, allowing discomfort to pass through rather than linger. In this state, recovery was no longer something that happened after effort, but an ongoing process woven into each moment of rest and movement. Gradually, I began to understand that calm is not the absence of activity, but the foundation upon which meaningful activity is built. By supporting deeper rest and easing internal tension, glycine seemed to restore a natural rhythm that modern life often disrupts. The body felt less like a machine being driven and more like a system being listened to, responding with quiet resilience and a renewed capacity to rebuild itself from the inside out. When spirulina entered my routine, it did not feel like an addition, but like a correction, as if something subtle yet essential had been restored. There was no surge of artificial energy, no sharp stimulation, but a steadier sense of vitality that unfolded quietly over time. Fatigue did not disappear dramatically. Instead, it loosened its grip, no longer dominating the edges of the day. I began to notice that endurance improved not because I was pushing harder, but because the body was no longer struggling to maintain itself beneath the surface. This experience shifted my perception of nourishment. Spirulina felt less like fuel and more like support, as though the body finally had access to what it needed at a foundational level. Daily activities required less effort, and recovery from mental and physical exertion felt more complete. There was a sense that the body's internal environment had become more cooperative, allowing energy to circulate rather than stall. This subtle resilience made it clear that exhaustion is often not the result of doing too much, but of being undernourished at the smallest scales. Over time, I noticed that inflammation-related fatigue softened, and my baseline energy became more consistent across the day. Instead of peaks and crashes, there was continuity. This consistency revealed how the body thrives on stability rather than extremes. Spirulina seemed to support this balance by reinforcing the body's capacity to adapt, not by forcing performance, but by strengthening the underlying systems that sustain it. In this way, strength emerged as a quiet endurance rather than a dramatic display. What became increasingly apparent was how cellular well-being influences perception itself. With less internal strain, focus sharpened, and mental clarity improved without feeling overstimulated. The body and mind appeared more aligned, responding to demands with composure rather than urgency. This alignment suggested that vitality is not merely a physical state, but a holistic condition shaped by how well the body is nourished and supported at every level. Spirulina also altered how I understood recovery. Rest felt more effective, as though the body had the materials it needed to rebuild during periods of stillness. The sense of being drained after effort was replaced by a quieter tiredness that resolved quickly. This reinforced the idea that fatigue is often a signal of imbalance rather than limitation, and that when the body receives comprehensive nourishment, it recovers with surprising efficiency. As weeks passed, the most meaningful change was not measurable performance, but trust. The body felt more reliable, less prone to sudden depletion. Energy no longer needed to be summoned through willpower. It was simply available. This experience underscored a profound truth about human health. When nourishment reaches the deepest layers of the body, strength expresses itself naturally without force, and endurance becomes a reflection of internal harmony rather than external pressure. When creatine monohydrate became part of my daily intake, the shift was not just physical, but deeply perceptual, altering how my body experienced potential itself. Strength did not arrive as aggression or tension, but as readiness, a quiet sense that energy was stored and accessible rather than constantly borrowed from tomorrow. Muscles felt fuller, not in a cosmetic way, but in a functional one, as if they were better prepared to respond when called upon. This readiness reduced hesitation, allowing movement to feel decisive without feeling forced. What became apparent early on was that this sense of stored capacity extended beyond exercise. Daily tasks felt lighter, not because they required less effort, but because the body no longer operated on the edge of depletion. There was a noticeable reduction in fatigue-driven inefficiency, the kind that causes the body to compensate, rush, or lose form under strain. With creatine present, the body seemed to choose precision over urgency, revealing how often exhaustion, rather than lack of ability, limits performance. Over time, changes in body composition followed naturally. Fat did not disappear through restriction or struggle, but through a shift in internal priorities. As muscles remained energetically supported, the body appeared less inclined to hold on to excess reserves. Energy utilization felt more deliberate, and this efficiency translated into a steadier metabolism that favored capability over conservation. The body no longer behaved as if it were preparing for scarcity, but as if it trusted that energy would be available when needed. What surprised me most was how creatine influenced mental clarity and confidence. With physical energy more reliably stored, the mind felt less reactive. Effort no longer carried the psychological weight of depletion, making challenges feel approachable rather than draining. This alignment between physical readiness and mental composure highlighted how closely strength and cognition are intertwined, and how a well-supported body creates space for clearer decision-making and sustained focus. Recovery also took on a different character. Instead of feeling like repair after damage, it felt like replenishment after use. Muscles rebounded quickly, not with urgency, but with completeness, suggesting that the body had the resources to restore itself without compromise. This reinforced the idea that growth is not merely the result of stress, but of the body's ability to respond to stress with sufficient internal reserves. As this pattern stabilized, strength became less about moments of exertion and more about continuity. The body felt capable across days rather than peaked on single occasions. This continuity fostered trust, not only in physical capacity, but in the body's long-term adaptability. Creatine did not push the body beyond its limits. It expanded the space within which those limits could be explored, allowing strength, leanness, and resilience to emerge as expressions of preparedness rather than force. When collagen peptides became part of my daily rhythm, the change was not immediately visible, but it was deeply structural, as if the body had begun reinforcing itself from the inside out. There was a growing sense of cohesion, a feeling that different parts of the body were no longer working in isolation, but as a unified system. Movements felt more integrated, less segmented, and this subtle shift revealed how much of physical confidence depends on the quiet strength of what holds us together rather than what we see in the mirror. Over time, I became aware of how connective tissues influence every action, even the simplest ones. Joints felt more stable without becoming rigid, and there was less hesitation during movement, as though the body trusted its own framework again. This trust manifested as smoother transitions between rest and activity, reducing the need for compensation patterns that often arise when the body senses weakness beneath the surface. The experience suggested that discomfort is frequently not a sign of failure, but of a structure that needs support rather than strain. What stood out most was how this internal reinforcement influenced recovery. After physical effort, the body felt less fragmented, and soreness resolved more evenly rather than lingering in specific areas. It was as if repair processes were no longer concentrated on crisis management, but distributed calmly across the entire system. This fostered a sense of resilience that felt sustainable, not dependent on constant intervention or aggressive recovery tactics. As days passed, changes extended beyond movement into the way the body responded to daily stress. Posture improved almost unconsciously, as the body no longer collapsed inward under fatigue. There was a subtle lift, a sense of alignment, that came from internal stability rather than conscious correction. This highlighted how connective integrity shapes not only physical capability, but presence itself, influencing how we occupy space and carry ourselves through the day. Collagen peptides also reshaped my understanding of long-term health. Strength began to feel less about short-term output and more about durability. The body appeared to prioritize preservation, reinforcing tissues that often go unnoticed until they fail. This shift reframed wellness as an investment in continuity, supporting the idea that the most meaningful gains are those that protect movement, flexibility, and comfort over time. Ultimately, the most profound change was a renewed sense of wholeness. The body no longer felt like a collection of parts being managed, but a structure being maintained with care. This internal coherence created a foundation upon which strength, mobility, and confidence could build naturally, reinforcing the idea that when the body's framework is supported, everything else moves forward with greater ease and integrity.